Welcome back to the Wine Tech Insiders podcast, episode 16. We're back to the news. We're covering the topics that are happening in the world of wine tech. And with us, as always, are our Wine Tech Insiders. We have Nick from Wine Owners, Jonathan from Bottlebooks.
Hello.
And Laurie from Oushinery.
Hi there.
The first bit of news, which might seem like a small thing, but I think is maybe much more interesting than even on the surface. Jancis Robinson has somewhat sold her website to Recurrent Ventures. She'll of course still be running content and still be involved. But Recurrent Ventures is a company that runs a number of subscription websites, including Popular Science, Savar, and Domino, and a bunch of others, if you might know. Nick, what do you think about this? What do you know about this?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. I gathered, given that Jancis writes for the Financial Times, the first question might have been kind of, how come you weren't bought by a publisher? And the answer, of course, is that she was bought by a publisher, just not a traditional publisher. And I think that, it's very easy to underestimate the challenge of a traditional publishing business migrating to an online model. And it's really very exciting to see businesses like Recurrent building the new publishing model of today and the future, because that's what they're doing. And the new publishing model is digital first. It's based around, services revenues, not purely content, and certainly not purely advertising, or indeed not advertising in some instances. So I think that, if you look at the traditional publishing models, the common ground between them and a business like Recurrent is that they are made up of a number of properties that are acquired or created over time. They are a constellation of little businesses that share a common back office and, a variety of other central functions. So Recurrent, as a digital first publisher and a traditional publisher, would probably feel rather similar in that regard. Certainly if you compare it to companies like RedX, what was Reed Elsevier, who Declaration I worked for 40 years, so I know a little bit about that market. But yeah, that's what's really exciting, that this is a publishing model that is building properties and building a very significant aggregate audience of 45 million visitors, subscribers, and who are monetizing that in ways that are much stickier, much more recurring, perhaps, than a traditional publishing model might have been.
Laurie, what do you think?
Well, what I thought was interesting when I was diving into it a little bit, is just, so we don't know for how much it got sold, right? You're just this is not public knowledge. This, I'm personally curious, but also when I was, reading interviews and everything, how many times she mentioned that the technology part that is becoming more and more prominent in a business was extremely challenging for her and her little team. It was really not so much, again, from what transcribed from her interview, not so much the content and everything, but just how do you make this publication, the content, technology 2021 and beyond, right? What is the publication of the future? And obviously they're not the only one trying to figure it out, right? Ask any publishers or newspaper out there. But I thought it was really interesting just how much it transpired that it seemed like the technology component of a business that probably wasn't nearly as big when she started, but just like started to really impact. And also you could tell like she was not having as much, fun with that part while recognizing that it was more and more crucial. So I thought it was very interesting how often she mentioned tech throughout.
Well, and she also didn't sell to a wine company. So she didn't sell to a large, Gallo or somebody else in the wine world. And we're all here tech companies that are specifically for wine. And here comes a tech company from the outside and grabs up a kind of an asset in the wine world. Is this, Jonathan, like, is this something that, what do you make of this part of it? Like, do we think that we're sometimes too special in the wine world, and then somebody's actually cookie cuttering this somewhere else and can come in and sweep in, or do you think there's something about that aspect of it?
I wouldn't say we're necessarily too specific. I think Recurrent, there's not tons of businesses out there that are like Recurrent. I mean, what makes Recurrent, like what makes this media business work, is that they're basically, their primary competitor, I believe, is Google. The way that they make their money is by keeping the traffic in-house. And they do that by buying lots of publications, so that if somebody's reading popular science, they can put an ad up for going and reading Jancis. And they didn't have to pay Google in order to link them through to jancisrobinson.com. And if you're on jancisrobinson.com, you can take them somewhere else. And so they built this sizable business by basically capturing the revenue that Google would normally be capturing to, in ad links and stuff. And I think when you look at then like a publication like jancisrobinson.com, if you have a choice to be either in a wine specific ecosystem where probably everybody in that ecosystem already knows you and already reads you and already subscribes to you, or you have the option to go where the audience is 100 times larger, and you might pick up where people might not be aware of you because wine is not their daily bread. I think that's what Recurrent offered and probably also saw, because I don't think they had a wine publication in their stable, and now they do. So I don't think it's necessarily a focus or generalist, but it seems like it makes sense. It's for what she had built, where the platform can grow, and what Recurrent is doing.
But in that way, is Jancis really, Nick? Is Jancis really unique? I mean, could other critics, wine influencers, let's say, follow Jancis, or is Jancis just something she's just created something unique in the wine world, and this is the kind of one-off?
I don't think it is a one-off. I mean, I think what she has created is brilliant and has some significant uniqueness to it, particularly in the way that she straddles everyday drinking wine and fine wine. And frankly, to Laurie's point, I think she's built a fantastic website. She's replatformed. I think she replatformed quite recently within the last couple of years to sort of bring herself up to speed. But obviously the overhead of doing that and the realization that that's an ongoing process and not just, an event once every few years, probably
right.
significant food for thought, right? I mean, that is absolutely the reality of it. I think what perhaps might have made her particularly interesting to a business like Recurrent was, let's say she's got 60,000 subscribers and a very high renewal rate, very sticky. So this is monthly recurring revenue, MRR, and everyone wants that, right? And yet she's built that audience up without doing any advertising at all. To Jonathan's point. So what happens, what can happen if you come on board with a business that just understands how all of that stuff works and can really scale up and build a bigger global audience. I think her audience already, by the way, is global. She was certainly seeing a growth in North American subscription. But for me, I think the common elements are very sticky, monthly recurring revenue, relatively low churn, significant audience, high value audience, and yet lots of potential for growth based on the fact that that audience was essentially organic. So I think any business, whether it's, you know, in our market or in many other niches, are potentially just as interesting, particularly where you have an affluent audience that is, you know, that's capable of high discretionary spend.
Now, one of the things they talked about was more growth in the US. Laurie, you're quite connected to California and the US. Is she a big player? Is she there? Do people talk about her?
Full disclosure, I did not know about her. Like, I'm not that well versed, you know, like dived into like, you know, sommelier and like wine critics, but like she's not a household name here in North America. I wouldn't say so. Like we have more like the, you know, traditional like Robert Parker and all of this that just have like their, like it's just like more known as name. And like to me, like, and they look very differently, but like one digital publication that speaks about wine a lot and is growing like crazy is VinePair, which is, you know, totally different in terms of like look and feel and everything, speak about wine as well. But like it's just like very interesting, much more, I don't want to say millennials because that's just like overdone, but just like a bit more like wine as an interesting, almost like novelty product. Like it's got like more like, oh, I want to learn about it and be smart and just like look cool, very nice illustrations and everything. So that would be more this type of publication that are mainstream in North America. What's going to be interesting for me as she grows in North America is how she navigates, and when I say she and her team, obviously, you know, not to come like the older generation know it all and you should follow my advice. Like I think VinePair has been on purpose at times like very you know, kind of contrarian or just like, you know, making talk, like not taking wine too seriously or just like having fun with it to just get people a buy-in. So just like I think it's going to be very interesting, like the communication and the growth around it. Yeah,
Jonathan, I mean, this is something that is out there that the critics and Jancis, I guess, as we've said, is a critic, but she has transformed. There is more to the Jancis.com, but this idea of the critics, as Laurie said, the older generation coming and saying this is a good wine, that's a bad wine. Majestic, independent retailer, wine retailer in the UK, just made an announcement about how they are going to have kosher wines, which sort of ties into this, that the idea that, you know, what are consumers looking for? We have Vivino with ratings and what your friends are looking at. We have the kosher wines and vegan wines, and, you know, where does that stand from a data points? What are people concerned about collecting? You know, what should wineries even be thinking about? You know, should they be thinking about growing another grape or doing kosher or vegan wines or something like that? I mean, or should they be putting wine in a can? You know, what's out there? What are you seeing?
Well, I think if Seb was here, I'm sure he would kind of get on this path that you really have to get to know your customers and know who is buying your wine, because I think if there's been any sort of recurring topics over the duration of our podcast the past few months, is that there is multiple paths that people can take to discovering wines that they like. And some people find their wines through Jancis, others through Vivino, others through Robert Parker, others through VinePair, and there's different audiences are respond to different themes and different approaches. And going into specialized wine segments, I think does make a lot of sense, especially if you know that if you can identify that need. I mean, for example, I think Waitrose in the UK, they are obviously one of the more premium retailers, and one of their core clienteles are vegan consumers. And so they make sure that across their entire portfolio, I mean, not just wine, but also the rest of the stores, that they cater to that, and that they do a lot of due diligence on the wines to know that this wine is indeed a vegan wine and we can stand behind it. And so when you go into but I think that's something you have to do when you go into these more specialized niches, is that if you go into kosher, you need to be certain that that wine, that the wine is kosher. But it is interesting, these niches. I mean, we've started working with a large distributor in the Middle East, where it's not just about kosher wines, but it's about Meruvio wines, which have to be treated in a special way, basically kind of cooked, for lack of a better way of describing it. But there is a demand. There is, in certain markets, there is a demand for these different styles. And
Laurie, are you seeing label trends going in one direction?
And like I would say, like, so again, I'm based in North America. I think much more transparency, and in the not just like the winemaking, but more like the impact, like social and environmental impact. Like this, we're seeing more and more, like on the shelf, Oushinery sees more and more labels where it's really clear if this wine is helping the reintroduction of salmon in the rivers, if this wine is from a sustainable, company, B Corp. Like, it's just like all of this, a lot of like on the West Coast here, like water management, we hear drought constantly. Now, of course, it is like gigantic fires constantly. And I think while people still want to drink their wine, like, they don't want necessarily to do it at the detriment of, like the bigger environment we live in. So I think more and more wineries are also following through. I think there was a lot of talk, and I know it takes, a lot to change, like your wine growing practice, but more and more like, drip irrigation, to like wineries claiming like, hey, we now use 40% less water than 45 years ago or something like that. And this really has an impact, because as a consumer, like, hey, those two wines are pretty much the same price. They, more or less stays the same, but one uses 40% less resources for the same result. This is where my dollar is going to go. And full disclosure, like, I buy like this as well. Like, like if given the choice, like, I'll go with like the most sustainable option. So more and more, I think some wineries were doing it earlier, but now they're really making it more visible on their packaging. It used to be at the back, and now it's even at the front of the label or on the capsule.
Is it like a trend that everybody's going to a certain or is there what Jonathan is saying? You have labels for certain consumers, with awards on them or whatever, and then labels for other consumers, and it's kind of more splitting.
The way I see it right now, like the way I can observe it, it's just I think the biggest, like one group of biggest wineries, they create sub-brands and they go all in. But I would then be surprised if they're just evaluating, right? Like, it's just like, how is that answering? So right now, I find them separated. And you have like even e-commerce, it's like all about like social, social justice and things like that. But I think it's more like almost like A/B testing, in the world of tech. Like, if, everyone wants better sustainability practice across the board, like, I don't see why not this, could be merged to like the regular, wine production out there. Like, nobody will be against it if the quality stays there and all of that. So there's just, right now I'm seeing it separated, but like, I wouldn't be surprised if it merges, give it a few more years to have like a result.
Nick, what do you see?
That's my theory.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not an area that I'm massively knowledgeable about, but I would have thought, intuitively, I'm with Jonathan in the starting point being really understanding your customer base. And I think with the growth of e-commerce across all of the wine segments, I think it's, that provides enormous scope for understanding the kind of segmentation that your customers and your broader addressable market are interested in, whether it's kosher wines, whether it's dry farmed wines, whether it's low sulfur wines, whether it's high density wine. That's probably a little bit too geeky and niche, actually, the last one. But so I think the starting point is your customers. The second key thing is being able to understand segmentation, your addressable market segmentation, to a level of granularity that's never really been possible before, and which allows you to do great experimentation, to do A/B testing and all the rest of it. And then, I think from a producer's perspective, of course, that there are producers who bottle kosher-specific wines, and they've been doing so for many years, like classified growth chateaus in Bordeaux. But I think more interesting is the alignment of the producers with the segmentation that the channels of distribution are understanding in respect of their customers, because that way you have authenticity. You don't have a producer who's kind of, prepared to be whatever the market wants them to be tomorrow. They are who they are, and the channels of distribution are doing a better job of being able to profile and segment those the wines that come from a particular producer or another in far more meaningful ways that align much more accurately with the interests of the consumer.
Laurie, you were saying that you might choose a wine because it uses less water, it's better for the environment. What about, would you go and get your car fueled up at a gas station that has wine in it because it will save carbon dioxide emissions? There is a fuel that they are going to use in LeMans this year, which is the 24-hour famous 24-hour race. And apparently it's supposed to reduce the emissions of some of the cars by 65%, and it is made from wine waste. Laurie, what do you think? Do you think this is...
I mean, at first this feels like sacrilegious, but French wine to feel like a French race. I'm like, okay, like there's something patriotic about it. I think, again, like I'm not, it's not my area of expertise. What I would be curious to know is like, how much did it take to produce that wine? That then we are saving as well. Like, just like what were the resources involved to make, grapes wine that is then not being consumed by human, but then it's just burned as energy. Like it's, yeah. So I would be curious to see the actual add up. Yeah.
I think they're using the wine waste. So they're using
wine waste.
The lees and all the stuff that's left over afterwards, and they're fermenting that, I think.
But is it too late, Jonathan? Is the world all in on electric, and this is
well, I think it goes back to there's barely enough vineyards to sustain the world's drinking tendencies. If it also had to sustain our driving tendencies, that might be one step too far. So I think electric has a leg up on wine.
Yeah,
I must say I love the idea. I spend a period of time in LeMans each year, which is Europe's largest forest, right? Farmed forest. And we see more and more of the plantations being replaced with cornfields. And you know what? If we can reduce the amount of cornfields that are being planted for bioethanol fuels, and replace it with waste that's a byproduct, something that's already being grown sustainably, then I think that is brilliant and maybe part of the future, at least in terms of the next 10 or 15 years.
What I love about it, honestly, because obviously the 24 Heures du Mans, sorry, it's weird to say it in English. So it's only just like literally one day, long day, 24 hours race. So it's, it's not a massive impact on, like what the planet is facing. What I do love though is how it opens as a possibility, even in the mind of the audience, right? Like, it's just like, oh, we didn't even know it was possible. It's either like inert, like oil, or it's electric. It's like, oh, like it could also be, wine waste or something like. It's just like, I love how it just possibly like, opens up a bit like the world of possibilities out there in the mind of like everyday, people such as myself. Like, that was just like, it's like surprising. And then you think a bit about the physics. I'm like, oh, I can see it, how doable, what else is out there. And yeah, like, it's just like how it can get a way out. So I find it interesting, almost on a marketing standpoint, but like marketing of science, I guess.
A way to go, haven't we, in terms of figuring out what it look like. And whether it's electric and whether it's hydrogen. I guess if you work for Air Liquide, you'd probably be banging the hydrogen drum pretty hard. But in the meantime, there's a bit of a space to fill, right?
And don't forget, by 2050 there'll be a Mr. Fusion, according to Back to Future, on the DeLorean with the Mr. Fusion that they just put the oil, the beer, and the banana peel into.
Sure.
Okay, that was episode 16 of the Wine Tech Insiders podcast. Thank you again, Laurie from Oushinery, Jonathan from Bottlebooks, and Nick from Wine Owners. We'll see you all again in a few weeks.
Bye.